Let's do this. Next, let's look at sweat glands. So we did already look at everything in the reticular layer, but we're going to look at everything specifically. Okay, so there are two types of sweat glands that you need to be aware of and understand. Those two types of sweat glands are, one, here you have an eccrine gland. And the eccrine gland is obviously, maybe it's not obvious, it's made out of epithelial tissue. And it's like this squiggly gland. You see how it has a duct, and the duct goes to the surface directly. What I mean by duct, I mean it has a tube. Like it has a tube that's going to go directly to the surface of the epidermis or of skin. This gland makes water-based sweat. So basically, the purpose of this gland is temperature regulation. So let's do temperature regulation using our sweat gland. And then if I have some room over off to the side, then I'll do temperature regulation in terms of like lowering temperature regulation. So we're going to do our homeostatic feedback loop. And I know you guys don't know what that is, but homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a specific range value. That range value could be temperature, it could be the amount of nutrients in blood. So a lot of that goes back to things like blood sugar levels and how insulin gets released to regulate that. We talk a lot about this in 2240, like what basically are those levels? Okay, not what are those levels, what is homeostasis and how do we maintain it? In this case, we're going to talk about temperature regulation. So we're going to see that, let's just say we have a normal temperature. So I'm going to do this scale that a lot of times we do here. This is normal temperature. So the normal temperature is roughly 98 degrees, okay? Like 98, 98.6, 98.7, sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. So if our normal temperature goes high, because let's say outside temperature increases, and our normal range now goes from 98 degrees to, let's say, 100 degrees. Like that's starting to get really hot. Technically, it shouldn't even get that high. It should be like 99 degrees. If your temperature is like 100, you're starting to get a fever. How a fever works is different. We'll talk about that when we talk about the immune system, okay? Because the homeostatic feedback loop doesn't work anymore. That 99 degrees has to be registered by receptors in the skin. What types of receptors? Thermoreceptors, receptors that make sure to sense temperature, okay? Those receptors are then going to send a message to the brain, in this case, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is what we call the control center. It's basically the area of the body that sets the range value and then determines if you're within that range value. So once the hypothalamus determines we're not at the appropriate 98.6 degrees, it's going to send messages, okay? It's going to send messages to what we call an effector, something in the body that's going to help us go back to our normal range. In this case, it's the eccrine gland. Okay, so the eccrine gland produces sweat. Once you release sweat, then what happens is the moisture wicks off the surface, and that causes temperature to be reduced. The other thing is that blood vessels here dilate. Dilate meaning they get bigger. As you send more blood, that means more, this means increasing blood to the skin. So blood is also going to contain heat. It's hot. It's going to contain heat. And as you send that heat right here, like this heat up towards the surface, plus you have water-based sweat coming off of the surface here, that's going to help you reduce the heat that's being brought to the surface. So overall, the effect here should be to go back to normal body temperature. So this is what a homeostatic feedback loop is. I don't expect you to be able to write the homeostatic feedback loop, but I expect you to understand the parts of the skin that are required to maintain body temperature if temperature increases. If temperature decreases, let's just kind of just trying to think, do that right here-ish. Okay. If temperature decreases, we just do our like normal range. Basically, if temperatures decrease, so if this is 98 degrees, let's say we go to 97 degrees here, right? Because outside is low. When outside temperatures decrease, then again, it goes to our receptors in the skin. Or I shouldn't say it goes to, it's sensed by receptors in the skin. That goes to the hypodermis. Oh, I'm sorry, hypothalamus. And then the hypothalamus is going to send this to a couple of effectors. I talked about them in lecture, but I'm sure most of the class, like just some people are just asleep. Which, yeah, makes me wonder. But I mostly talked about what happens to blood vessels. So in this case, blood vessels constrict. Okay. So constricting mean they get smaller, which means there's less blood flow towards the skin. Blood gets pulled away from the skin. So skin feels a little bit colder. Yes, you're already cold, but you don't want to send blood and you don't want to send heat to the surface. The other thing that's going to happen is on the hair cell here. Oh, wait, there is already one there. I'm going to erase this. There is this erector pili muscle or pili muscle right here, which is a smooth muscle. And this is going to give us goosebumps. And so as that contracts, the hair stands straight up and that increases surface area to make our skin longer or like higher to help retain heat. And then the third thing is muscles contract. And when muscles contract, they need energy to do that. One of the byproducts of making energy is heat. So all those things work together to help us bring back our temperature to its normal 98-degree range. Okay, so that's how temperature regulation works for skin. You should understand the iccrine gland is the one doing this in terms of reducing our temperature if temperature gets too high. That's not, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Most of us know that it's hot and we sweat. Okay, we sweat all over. You don't necessarily just sweat in your armpits because these sweat glands are all over the body. The other sweat glands, I don't know, let's make this in purple. This one right here, this is called an apocrine gland. So the apocrine gland, you're going to notice a couple of things. Like notice how its duct goes towards the hair. It's going to be associated with a hair follicle. Not air, hair. This produced more fatty plus protein-based sweat. And they're only found in the axillary and inguinal area. These are thought to produce sweat because of stress. Like, why do we produce this certain type of sweat during stress? The other is during sexual arousal, but that's actually not a form of stress, but it's kind of part of the sympathetic portion of the nervous system. Oh, a little bit. Sort of not. I don't know. We'll just put that right here. So why are we producing that during stress? Nobody really knows. It could be that it has some linkage to how you smell, and it's thought, like it's maybe some sort of like attractant to other people. That explains the sex part. Doesn't exactly explain the stress part, though, does it? So sweat isn't going to be stinky because, I mean, here it's water and salt, and here it's fat and protein, and that could be stinky after a while. But most of the time, what it is there's bacteria on the surface of your skin that doesn't die because of sweat, but actually feeds off of that sweat. And that's actually what causes you to be smelly. So technically, when you come home from the gym, you're not really smelly because that sweat isn't producing odor. It's mostly the sweat coming from stress, which would produce odor. However, working out would be part of, yeah, sympathetic nervous system. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you would still smell after the gym because your apocrine glands are also probably starting up, not because of stress, but because your body is under stress because you're like exercising. So it's under a stressful sort of state or it thinks it's in a stressful state. Okay. So this might be the reason why our the arms of our t-shirts have always that like kind of yellowish, like weird stuff. Sure, partially your deodorant, but also partially because the sweat that you have there is like gets ingrained in the t-shirt material. So let's look at sebaceous glands next.